Hi everyone, good evening, welcome. My name is Mark Tribe. I'm Director of Art and Technology in the School of the Arts. And I want to welcome you to the Art and Technology lectures for the fall semester of 2004. And I want to let you know first about the upcoming lectures. We have Jeffrey Kennard on the 28th of October. He's an intellectual property lawyer specializing in legal issues that arise in new media environments. Siva Vaidyanathan is going to speak on November 18th. Siva is a professor at NYU in Culture and Communications and published a book that's very relevant to the subject called Copyrights and Copywrongs, and also a newer book called The Anarchist in the Library. John Ippolito, who is a curator at the Guggenheim Museum here in New York and an artist, and also a professor at the University of Maine, where he runs their new media center. He'll speak on December 2nd. And Corey Archangel, who's a computer artist who hacks around with obsolete video game hardware like Game Boys and Nintendos, will speak on December 16th. All the lectures will take place Thursday nights, 6 p.m. here, except for the last one, which will be over in Dodge Hall in the Leroy Neiman Gallery. Our lectures from last semester are available online. We have a website for this lecture series. Just Google Columbia Art and Technology Lectures. And if you miss any of the upcoming lectures, you'll also be able to find them online shortly, within a couple, 2-3 weeks after each lecture. Wanted to thank the Center for New Media Teaching and Learning for working with us to produce the streaming video for the website, and also the Computer Music Center for helping support the series. The topic of the Art and Technology lectures this semester is open source culture, intellectual property, technology, and the arts. Artists have always imitated and emulated one another, but starting sometime in the beginning of the 20th century, a new mode of creative practice began to emerge. Rather than creating their work ex nihilo from nothing, from scratch, artists began to sample, appropriate found materials. You might think about Picasso and Braque pasting bits of newsprint, newspaper onto their canvases, or the ready-mades of Marcel Duchamp, pop art, etc., right onto DJ music and net art more recently. The idea is to look at these kinds of appropriative artistic practices through the lens of open source software, which is software that's whose source code is made available to the public rather than held as a proprietary secret. To sort of see how technology has functioned to enable the emergence of these new forms of artistic practice, and look at what kinds of commonalities there might be between these technological practices of open source and these more cultural practices. It is with great pleasure tonight that I introduce Joy Garnett, our first lecturer, who's going to open up the series. Joy is the editor of Newsgrist, which is a blog, a weblog, that focuses on art, politics, and digital culture. She also is the author, editor, producer of the Bomb Project, which is an incredible web resource, a kind of trove of images and links and other kinds of resources, texts, relating to nuclear weapons. It's seen as a resource for artists and activists who want to make work that's engaged politically with issues around nuclear weapons and nuclear warfare. And it's an incredible resource. I recommend you check it out. Just Google the Bomb Project, and you'll find it. But Joy is also an accomplished painter, and that's really what brings her here tonight. She had a solo show last year at Debs & Company called Riot, in which she produced paintings that were based on images that she sampled from the web. And we're going to hear about her brush with the long arm of intellectual property law. With that, I introduce Joy Garnett.
Okay. I I'm calling this lecture Painting Mass Media because it's become part of what I do. And I decided to describe fair use as an art because it seems to become more and more of an art as intellectual property law becomes more and more of a litigious area. And although it's described as, in the Constitution as a limitation of copyright, it's more and more difficult to know just where fair use begins and ends. And with that, I had produced a series of paintings based on newspaper images for a show called Riot, as Mark described. And I had a brush with the law. And before I go into those sources, those mass media sources, I just want to say a few things about sources in general and my method in terms of the sources I look for in order to make a series of paintings. Before I got into mass media, meaning newspaper, magazine, web, photojournalistic images of real things going on in the world, I spent a long time sampling images, first from videotapes that I bought from the government, and then later I just went straight to the web. And I found that there was a large amount of declassified material that had been released into the public domain and that was available, for which you didn't have to ask permission, and unless you were going to create a commercial project, a movie, or something like that. And at that stage, I was interested in the problem of government secrecy and how that mediated our knowledge of certain historical events, and how, after the disclosure of documentation of those events, how that affected our understanding of them. And I created a series of paintings, and that also eventually led to the creation of the Bomb Project website. Generally, I came to learn to use Google and other search engines and just search wildly for different things that were mostly from government and military sites. Images like that interested me. This was before 9/11. And I would transmute them into paintings. And it was pretty much my sense that what I was doing with painting was a play on or a critique of how media images affect us or don't affect us. And I guess it's my contention that the medium really does determine how the viewer deals with the image. And so painting the same image that one sees, or perhaps, or perhaps doesn't register as one finds it in the mass media, allows the viewer to engage the image with a different part of themselves, because painting has baggage. There's historical baggage, so you actually approach a painting, whereas images in the mass media are generally things you don't approach in the same way. They kind of move through you or over you and are forgotten. Anyway, I found a vast array of sources, and some of them allowed me to go into their directories like this. This was an incredible source for First Gulf War imagery, and that this particular Army lab shot off the television set as it was happening, and that was a while ago, and I made some paintings from those. I found it was possible to capture, to save QuickTime movies and MPEGs and choose stills from those, from which I made a series of works. And it seemed that the way those images were couched or presented would affect the way that the viewer internalized them. And so a painting would also affect that. I chose some sources which had, commercial, from the commercial world. I guess the Discovery Channel was a great source of declassified war imagery, and where it might be sensationalized there, it turned into something else once it was translated into paint. Some things left out, some things left in. Well, all this online searching leads you into places you really never knew you were going to in the first place. And I guess it's important to say that my sources really do establish the conceptual framework for each project. So that that previous project had to do very much with sources being hidden and then disclosed, released into the public domain, and the project was therefore very much about how we internalize things that had been kept from us. This project is kind of the opposite. It's more about images that we're buffeted with, that stream through our lives and that we almost don't register, that are forgotten quickly. And it was pretty much my intention to try and retrieve lost media images and rework them as paintings that would stop them and make them more interfaces for reflection, if you would. Google is good because it's sort of it's a leveler, and you find all kinds of things. You just plug in a word like rioters or war or explosion or bomb or unrest or protest or demonstration, and you get all kinds of things. You get etchings, you get things from anarchist sites, indie media, mainstream news sites, art, all kinds of things. And I began to feel that so many of these images, which really we see ourselves depicted, needed to be captured somehow. And painting seemed the perfect route. A more obviously self-reflexive medium. So this is just a look into my files. And I collect these things, I put them away. Sometimes I change their title in the file. Sometimes I just leave them. And depending on whether I've left their original title, I often forget where they came from, what the original context was. And this is important for me, and it's important in this discussion of media imagery, because the image itself contains no intrinsic or ethical rigor. It does not tell you by itself what it means, what it wants you to mean. It's therefore a wild thing. And images released into the media, even though their original context may have a very specific and particular meaning, meant to sway you in this way or the other, once they're out there, and they can be cropped, and their meaning changed, and point of view really is everything sometimes. And if you don't know where it came from, it means maybe so many things, and then once you know, it means a very specific thing. And this is just some background as to how I got into this in the first place. So, and I'm not the first, obviously, and clearly there have been many artists who've used photographic material for many years, for many decades, for centuries really. And there's even some treatment of how Vermeer used a camera obscura and so on. But I'm gonna just limit this to painters we probably are familiar with, artists who've used journalistic photographs in order to comment on our society, on our culture. The most obvious, Andy Warhol. who used news photographs, he used everything. He used what we would consider to be part of our cultural heritage, things from the public domain, to comment in various ways on our culture. Gerhard Richter, the German painter, does this with everything, but he made a very famous series of works on the Baader-Meinhof group, which was an extreme leftist group in Germany that was sort of like a kind of Weather Underground type organization. And he used photographs of the Baader-Meinhof in jail, and they were very controversial photographs to begin with, and the paintings themselves were extremely controversial when they were publicized. And as you can see just from those slides, let's go back just for a second. Well, what happens when you look is very different when you look at the painting. Even this JPEG of a painting of Gerhard Richter's, there's a different level of engagement between the viewer and the image than there would have been from a news photograph. Leon Golub, possibly the only painter of his generation who treated the Vietnam War in his art on such a grand scale, on such a thorough scale. He had cabinets full of scraps of newspapers, magazines, things he kept. And I found this magnificent quote, which I'll read just part of. "I'm nuts on images. I cut them out of books and newspapers, mostly books and magazines, and this is absolutely crucial to me because this is one of the ways I tap into the world." And he goes on to say, "I see the world because it comes to me through media, through film, through newspapers, through TV. We're surfeited, really. We're overexposed. We're shoved out all the time by media." And I've often said it's kind of a half joke. You know how they say you're 60 or 80% water? Well, actually, we're made up of 25,000 photographs, 11,000 films. All of this has moved through us and is affecting us in some way or the other. So we're media creatures. We're living in an extraordinary visual world. I want to do a certain kind of reporting, a certain kind of reportage. This is the way things were at this particular moment in time, the moment being the 20th, 21st century. This is where I'm situated. When I look out, this is what I see. I'm not interested in abstract notions of beauty. I'm not interested in formalism. I'm interested in beauty because due to my perverted sense of things, I think of this as beautiful. I really do. So I had to quote that because I really do feel Leon Golub, maybe more than a lot of these other artists, is a kind of mentor and an example to me, and I feel very much moved by his ideas and his work. More recently, and in fact on through mid-October at the Q Art Foundation, is an artist from Canada named Stephen Andrews, who recently collected some of those notorious Abu Ghraib photographs and made some very interesting rubbings based on them. Rubbings, I can't tell you exactly how he does them, but he uses some kind of surface so that he can make more obvious the technological interface that we meet when we view newspaper and magazine images. He calls attention to that surface, to the mediation going on. And I won't read all of this, but he basically searched the internet, found these photographs. He told me that he was looking for pornography to do a pornography project, and when he found these, he thought, this is pornography enough. I'll do this project. And the point, I suppose, of talking about these works is to show how many ways artists who aren't even connected by generation or culture reutilize images and documentation and material that exists in the public domain that we all experience in a day-to-day way. And this is the stuff that we experiment with. And a great deal of this stuff goes into the garbage. But the freedom to use this stuff, to sample it, appropriate it, whatever you want to call it, is part of the creative process. And it's not just artists who use it and reutilize it. Once the stuff is out in the world, everybody can get to it, especially now. And it gets reused in interesting ways. That might be my favorite. And artists like Richard Serra created uncharacteristic images from that particular photograph. This is downloadable at a website, and he sent out a message saying, you know, download this image and plaster it everywhere. And during the protest against the Republican convention in New York, I saw a lot of people with this placard, which is kind of interesting. Richard Serra, go. Now, Steve Mumford is someone who kind of did the opposite. He decided not to rely on these mediated images that come from war-torn places that are found in the media. That he went there. He's there now, and he's been there. He's been going back and forth since we invaded Iraq. And I just thought I'd put this image first. It's called Adjusting Sights, which is kind of perfect. And so in a way, he's doing what photojournalists do, but he's also doing what painters do. And being there, I wonder if he has trouble creating enough distance, creating enough mediation so that he can do the work. I don't know. But their effect, I think, is very different from photojournalism. And of course, they're presented as art. They're art. They're more art than reportage, probably. If anyone hasn't read this book, and is interested in this whole argument about images in the mass media and the photojournalistic mission to change the world and how truthful an image is, this is a very good read, and it's a very short book, and it's very dense with questions. And this is sort of a core of this talk, that the same photograph can be read in a million ways. The minute the photojournalist shoots the image, his intention, his or her intention, in a way is gone, is lost. Even with copyright protection, even with agencies such as Magnum, once the photograph is in the world, it has a life of its own. Now, these are photojournalistic photographs, and I haven't attributed them because I don't know who took them, because they come from my file, and this is what I do. I don't save all that information. I just grab JPEGs and I shove them in a file. And months later, or weeks later, or a day later, I print them out and I stick them in an actual manila file. And then I choose certain ones to paint. Some of them can't possibly make a good painting. Some of them can. It's a judgment call. It's hard to say. Sometimes you think you're doing the right thing and you make a crappy painting, you throw it out. But the point is, you need to feel that you have the leeway to play, because art is play. And so here was my problem that I didn't know I had, and maybe it's not a problem, depending on who you are. Every single image that you just saw in that unattributed series is copyrighted. They're all copyrighted. So, but they're different. They're different than, say, a photograph that an artist makes in their studio, where they have actors and props, and where the entire thing is really a product of expression. And in fact, that's a term that is going to be used again and again in the law and in discussion of fair use: expression versus idea. And there's a concept called the idea-expression dichotomy, which we'll talk about in a second. But the point of fair use is that copyright is important, but it should be limited in certain circumstances in order to allow for a free exchange of information, research, reporting, creativity. And in the Copyright Act, it's a tradition, and it's in the law, that copyright does not apply to facts. It does not apply to ideas. If you write about a certain idea and someone copies what you wrote and says and puts their name on it, that's copyright infringement. But if they write about the idea itself, it's not. And a very dumb example in the visual arts would be Ansel Adams took a photograph of a mountain. That photograph is copyrighted, but other people are allowed to photograph that mountain. So that's a dumb example. It's just like really obvious. Objects in the public domain cannot be copyrighted. But where does expression begin and end? And where does fact begin and end? And that's the problem. It's very subjective. And I think it will always be subjective. There's no way to really pin that down. It's point of view, it's what you need, it's what you feel is the issue. Back to my files. Sometimes I look at the thumbnails or I look at the printouts and I see one and I feel the inclination to paint it. And I guess someday last summer I saw this guy and I thought, yeah, he's great. And I printed him out and I made a 70-inch tall painting. And then I forgot about it. I put it in my storage and I made other paintings. And eventually, though, I went back to it and I made a whole series of figures based on news images. News images I had collected from all kinds of places: mainstream news sites, anarchist web pages, crazy conspiracy sites, the New York Times, all kinds of places. And I made a series, and lo and behold, the gallery that then existed, that doesn't exist anymore, that used to represent me, said, let's do this as a show. And we decided to call it Riot. And here are some of the details of some of the paintings that were in it. And they are painterly transformative, well, there's a legal term, painterly transformations of found media images, stripped entirely of their original context in order to show other things, but loyal to some degree to the original text, to the original photographs, to some degree, to reference their origin, to reference that medium, to reference the difference between this medium and that medium. Because I'm a compulsive archiver, I put JPEGs of all of my paintings on a website where I can access them, where other people can access them. If I need someone to write an article or to write something on a painting, I can just email them the URL. It's very convenient. And galleries these days either have blogs or websites so they can announce their shows, and it's just sort of a convention. So this was my gallery's webpage, and they had the press release and various paintings that were in the show there. And the show opened mid-January. Early February, I got a really strange email from an acquaintance. Someone I've never met, but with whom I had a correspondence at one time because I had wanted to. It's a photojournalist who publishes his photographs in book form, and some of them interested me, and I thought I would ask permission, not my usual MO. And this was a while before, and he really didn't feel comfortable, and so we forgot about it. And I hadn't heard from him since then. And he sent me this. Susan Meiselas is going to visit with me in my studio later this week. I have the postcard from your show up by my desk. As you know, this is from one of her photographs in Nicaragua. Does she know about this? I assume she must. Yada, yada, yada. I don't want to get in the middle of this, but I do think I'll take it down. So he had this over his desk. Who knows if he ever took it down? Susan Meiselas evidently did give him a studio visit, or maybe she didn't. But anyway, I was surprised. I had no idea. I was calling this guy the Basque. I guess that's kind of stupid. He has a beret. My original fragment didn't show the rifle, the sandbags, the two other figures, the tank, the palm tree, or the dog patch behind him. It's very different when you see all these things, and I was kind of thrilled. Or the wound and the bandage on his rifle-holding arm. So he's not a kid in a rabble throwing Molotov. He's a revolutionary with an incredibly large gun, surrounded by other revolutionaries, a tank, and sandbags. He's a Sandinista. And this friend of mine sent me the URL so I could see this image on the Magnum site, because Susan Meiselas is a Magnum photographer. She is part of that organization, that agency that basically was created in 1947 as a way to protect and promote the careers of photojournalists by giving them copyright protection, by allowing them to be part of a club whereby they would be protected and where their images would be sent out to maybe newswires or published in book form. But basically, it's a very Magnum. It's a very famous, very important, very traditional organization. And well, as you can see, there's Magnum watermarks all over this image. And they have all of their photographs, their photographers' photographs online. And I worked my way backwards, and I found where this photograph came from. And it's from a book that Susan Meiselas published in 1981 of 71 images that she took from inside the revolution in Nicaragua. She photographed the regime, individuals in the regime, individuals, the revolutionaries. She was very much sympathetic to the revolution. She was very much part of the movement here that was disgusted with what our government, the part our government played in that story. And her book is an homage to the revolutionaries. And her images never went out on newswires. They were presented in this form, which is really an art form, although they were reportage. She was reporting on what was going on there. And she lived there for 10 years, dodging bullets. So what I'm trying to say is this person who threatened me with a lawsuit eventually, I have total respect for. But in other words, she's the precursor to the Steve Mumfords who go there with their little pads. And she's an artist, but she's a reporter. She's straddling the two worlds. Now, I was very peeved at this ominous email telling me that I had done something wrong, because I really, really didn't think I had. And plus, I was, interested in her work. It was kind of an accident. I wouldn't have gone to a book of a photojournalist and looked for a photograph and then made a painting from that. My project is kind of the opposite. I don't want well-known photographs. I don't want photographs that are considered or presented as art. I want the opposite. I want lost news footage, stuff that no one remembers. At my opening, there were people from around the art world, including a friend who's a curator at the International Center for Photography in New York, ICP. And he either didn't notice that it was from that painting, from that photograph, or he didn't care, or it didn't matter, or it didn't register. Painting is very large, photograph is in a book. never said anything. I made the huge mistake of mentioning this to my photographer friend, who really, really took umbrage and wrote me this. He was clearly disgusted. I went to Magnum, I looked at their copyright. You can go online and look at their copyright policy. Yeah, my friend freaked out. Well, I'm presenting it in a freak out way. It was a sore point with him. And as someone who had to make their living as a hack for magazines or doing commercial photography, I totally sympathize. I mean, but at least they make their living. It's interesting how, well, the only point I'm going to make with this is it's interesting how we all struggle as artists. We do our thing and we perceive others as the ones who make the money. And it's just a kind of knee-jerk reaction. And possibly, although I'm, at the beginning of my career, my paintings don't sell very much yet. But it was perceived, a show in a gallery in Chelsea, this is a man who lives in Minneapolis. Susan Meiselas is like probably eating sand in Iraq right now. I mean, these are people who struggle too. But the perception of a show in a gallery in Chelsea, I suppose, is not one of struggling from far away. So, and I just want to point out that his statement that Warhol always asked for permission is not true, and that this particular painting, he was threatened with a lawsuit over by the news photographer, and he settled that lawsuit by giving the news photographer another painting with photographs by some other photojournalist. But that's a case in point, because I think artists and people with sense, like enough sense not to go to court or not enough money to go to court, tend to want to settle things out of court. So the bad side of that is there isn't really any case law. There is very little case law that protects fair use in the visual arts. Because when people get sued, all right, if you go to court and you lose, damages can be up to, for copyright infringement of that sort, can be up to $100,000. If you win, you've been paying your lawyer probably almost half that for however long it takes. In the end, it's not worth it. Unless you have a landmark case and you're fighting, the good fight for copyleft, and you feel that you can make progress for the cause, most people are not going to go to court. I didn't go to court. I was advised to stay out of court. Here's just the definition, once again, of fair use. Copyright owners' rights are limited by a principle known as fair use. Under the Copyright Act, fair use extends to purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Now, none of those things, criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research, are specifically mentioned in the case law that exists. The only thing that specifically that you can really get away with is parody. And that comes up again and again. Did you use that image for parody? And if you can prove it was parody, it's usually obvious, then they don't have a case. But if you use it to comment on something else other than the original, I mean, I was not commenting on the original photograph. I didn't even have the whole photograph. I was using it to comment on many other things, mass media, art culture, freedom fighters, whatever you want to bring to that painting. It's something else, and including things that I didn't intend, because painting is very much more open-ended usually, and it's more about what the viewer brings. So one thing I need to point out right here is news reporting and fair use. Photojournalists operate under the principle of fair use. They don't have to ask permission. They don't get releases. They take their photographs, and those photographs go out. And just to be thorough, there are 4 cardinal points of fair use that are argued exclusively of one another, and the extreme murkiness of the area becomes apparent, because they're all very subjective, other than whether number one, the purpose and character of the use, whether it's commercial or nonprofit, even that, if you've created a transformative work that has some commercial value, because let's face it, almost everything in our culture we try to get to have some kind of commercial value, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've infringed. So if something goes to court, these four things are kind of put through the ringer by both councils. And the last one, number 4, the effect of the use on the potential market or value of the original work, that's the most important. Are you stealing money? Are you stealing money from the original person, from the copyright owner? Are you taking their market away? Are you putting your name on their photograph, saying it was yours and selling it? That's really what that's about. So now these 4 cardinal points were given to me by my lawyer, and then I went online and did some research, and I found them again and again and again. The other important one before I go on is number 2, the nature of the copyrighted work, whether it's creative or informative, and that brings up again the expression idea, the idea-expression dichotomy. And is the copyrighted work, is it a work of art? Is it pure expression? Or is it informative? Is it news? Is it reporting? Is it of historical value? Is it of the public record? Photojournalism is both. It's both. So that makes it all really complicated. It straddles both. How much of each? Where does expression end? Okay. Just to harken back, I just want to make sure I don't sound like I'm beating up photojournalists, because I'm not. But this is the concern. This seemed to be the nugget of the concern. My friend from Minneapolis, when I originally had asked him if I could use one of his images for a painting, this is why he felt I shouldn't, and I backed off. But basically, the idea that it would compete, the misunderstanding that they're two different entities, 2 different quantities, that they function differently, he couldn't see that. I didn't argue it with him because I didn't really want to be limited by someone else's nervousness. So I dropped the whole idea of ever asking anyone for permission ever again. Not worth it. Anyway, very shortly after all of this, I received, it was right after my show came down, I received a legal letter. My gallery received a fax legal letter, and I got one by email, and then we got hard copies. It was very interesting, because I really didn't expect it. And this is the core of it. The core of it is that I had stolen this image, that I had pirated the image, that it was a derivative image. Derivative is a legal terminology that we all use very casually. I said, or I used to say, I derived this painting from that photograph. I don't say that anymore, because that would tell you that I had created derivative rather than transformative works. Ms. Meiselas wanted me to take the images off the website, and I think that was probably, in the end, the only thing that mattered. I didn't get sued, I just got threatened, but I felt quite freaked out, because it was, what if every single photojournalist in the world came at me? I would have to do something else. They sent me this Xerox of the original, which I had seen, which didn't look like much of anything. I went back, I looked, I thought about it. Whilst one recognizes that artists often pay homage to other artists, copying of this kind constitutes copyright infringement. You are simply sailing under the flag of piracy, taking verbatim protected artistic expression. So her counsel was banking on the description of the original as artistic expression, period. And the use of the word piracy is really interesting, because piracy isn't used in that way. Piracy is used to describe someone who downloads something in its entirety and sells it or keeps it or shares it without paying. That's not quite what I did. So I went to a lawyer that was suggested to me, who is a champion of fair use and who only works with artists. And I asked him, am I a pirate? And I didn't just ask him. Actually, before I went to the lawyer, the day before I went to the lawyer, I opened the whole case up for discussion without naming names because I was really paranoid. And I sent an email to the Rhizome Raw listserv, where I've been corresponding and posting and writing and arguing since the late 90s, and where artists, digital artists, educators, and various media people kind of converge and discuss things. And the week before, everyone had been discussing the Grey album. So I thought, you know, okay, am I a pirate? I'm a painter. And people were incensed, and there was a long discussion that ensued. And at this stage, I was sort of resigned to my fate, that I was caught in some kind of legal thing that I didn't understand. I didn't know what, to me, I thought at that stage that fair use just meant that you could, you know, shoot slides out of an art history book and give a lecture, and you wouldn't have to ask permission. I brought images of both images, all the images, to the lawyer, and we had this discussion, transformative or derivative, and he convinced me that it was a very subjective thing. He felt that there was a lot of hoopla being made, that his word, over this case of mine, that it was silly, that it wasn't worth her while to sue me. She wasn't losing anything by me having a painting in a gallery. The show was down. But she wanted complete control of the purported derivative work. If I wanted to exhibit again, if I wanted to reproduce it in a magazine, if someone wanted to do an article and reproduce it, I would have to get her permission in writing first, according to her lawyer. And he said, don't sign that form. You don't have to sign that form. It's not a derivative work. They don't have a slam dunk case, and probably neither do you, because it depends on the judge. But we agreed that because I respect Susan Meiselas and really meant no harm, that I would always credit her or I would credit her on my website, because the images were on my website. I didn't agree to take them down. Well, so we crafted together a long letter that was not contentious, but basically not giving in 100%. And the core of that letter, and the core of my sense of these things now, is that is this last portion. Any photograph, regardless of how literal it might be, is affected by the personal influence of the photographer, but news photographs are in a category by themselves because of the public interest, because they exist mostly in the public domain. They affect public opinion. They're part of our cultural heritage. They belong to everyone to some degree. So we left it at that. An apology, a promise to credit her, and a refusal to sign the form saying that I'd created a derivative work and that I would ask for her permission if I wanted to exhibit it again. It seemed good. But no. So there was an exchange of nasty letters and nasty phone calls. I decided to take my image. Oh, right. Just one more example of bad case law, bad precedents. Jeff Koons, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Just really quickly. Jeff Koons found this photograph in a tourist shop, which had been commissioned for $250, and he got Italian artisans to make 3 huge polychrome wood sculptures, each of which was valued at $125,000. And he was sued by the guy who made the photograph. And Jeff Koons lost the case. So this was the legal precedent I was facing. And anyway, I removed my image from my website just because ISPs are notoriously weak-spined, and if they receive a court order, they generally remove your website or threaten you. And my gallery removed it too. And the minute we did that, and I told the Rhizome list that we did that, they grabbed my image. Well, it was right before I did that. They grabbed it and started mirroring it on all their sites. And this is where it gets weird, okay? Because people started making derivative work from my artwork in solidarity. And an artist named Ryan Griffiths declared Joy War, which is a reference to something called Toy War, which is, maybe I won't go into here, but it's a precedent of civil disobedience online by artists when an artist or a collaborative is being sued. And so people started fooling with the image. There's a Barbie. I love that. Joy War, a documentation of artist freedom, sampling media, and the net, with a little Microsoft manual in the lower right-hand corner. I don't know if you can see that. It says visual reference. Pretty good. I think someone at Rhizome must have made that, and I don't know who. And then this page that an artist in England put together, a media artist, with links to the various derivative artworks, and still up. And then something crazy happened. It hit the blogs. And once it hit the blogs, it went global because of the feeds and the news aggregators. So mostly because of NetArt News, which has an RSS feed and which went out to all the other blogs and news aggregators that subscribe to it. So it started to appear elsewhere. And on Ryan's site, which had a lot of great links to Creative Commons sites and informative sites. So it became a kind of education, you know. I learned a lot from Joy War. Myths about copyright, blah, blah, blah. Various local arts organizations pitched in. Blogs in California. Once these are online, you can read them. They're very funny. There's the Toy War people in Zurich. It hit Italy. Oops. Yeah, this guy emailed me this as an attachment. He clearly thought Pepsi was suing me. So I guess a few things got lost in translation. I didn't have the heart to tell him it wasn't Pepsi. But I thought it was great. This just made my day. Because at that point, I was demoralized, and I had to pay my lawyer, and I didn't really know what was going on. Prague, pretty cool. Crazy people. Stay Free magazine, edited by Carrie McLaren, which is a hub of, what can I call it? It's a hub of information and revolt against extreme copyright fundamentalism. I was very thankful for that. Once this was up on their website, I got calls from New York Times reporters who wanted to write about a copyright case that didn't have to do with music. And I thought, New York Times, and I called my lawyer, and he said, wrong, bad. This would be great if we were in court, but not a good idea. So I didn't. Anyway, it goes on and on. ASCII, wonderful ASCII sites. This is just a part of a huge pixelated JPEG. Crazy. Sometimes things got really abstracted and interesting, and really didn't really have much to do with the original image at all, which was kind of fabulous. And sometimes they had everything to do with the original image. That was everybody's favorite, Brit Letov. And then some guy sent me these, Rage Against the Machine. I thought, this is getting really out of hand. Splatterkitty.com. There were a lot of animated and various software-induced animation sites with links. I can't quite reproduce them here. These are just screenshots, but you can go, they're still on the web. This was an ingenious thing where you could hit a link and it would regroup. Molotov Remix by Mark Cooley, one JPEG sliced into 121 images, randomly reloaded via JavaScript. And the brilliant thing is the chances of users hitting upon the perfect realignment of images is less than winning the lottery, but just in case, he has a fair use argument ready. That was a shockwave animation. This was a QuickTime one that said art, not crime, after the letters finished. An interface where you could upload music and Molotov images and play them with other people at further field. And this fantastic thing, shockwave. In the midst of all this, I got a really late review, finally, on ArtNet, which reproduced a really bad JPEG of the image. The reviewer had no idea that I was being threatened with a lawsuit. And then when he found out, he put it on his blog, and then it went all over the place again. Of course, in the middle of this, I also got this from the lawyer. Thank you for removing the images from the website. So some part of me really wanted Ms. Meiselas to know what was going on, but as I never, ever, ever received any kind of direct correspondence from her, I let it go. You know, I don't think she knows about Joy War. Anyway, what was that site where I found and grabbed the fragment? Clearly she wanted to know because they wanted to get it off that site too. A little late. I looked everywhere. I looked everywhere. I looked everywhere. I did every possible search that I know I would do. It's just not there anymore. Whoever they were, whatever site it was, it's down. They took it down. The site isn't there. Who knows? But I did find it here. I found it at Harold Pinter's website, in which he has a portion of it unattributed in black and white, which he describes as an image which became emblematic of the Sandinistas' struggle to regain their democracy. So there was a time when it was really a famous image. It was emblematic, and it meant something. It meant something very important. And then it was forgotten. It was forgotten in the pages of an out-of-print book. So I leave it to you to decide whether giving something, inadvertently giving something a second life, or the opportunity for a second life through a transformative use is a bad thing or not. Yes, it's up to the copyright holder, but anyway. One blog had this very particular question, which I thought maybe went to the core of everything, and really wasn't about me or my painting or Susan and her photographs. In the end, these people, they don't have copyright protection, and their images are being used, and it's legal. It's legal because there's case law that says that you don't need to ask permission from people in public when you shoot their photographs. And it was because of that, those decisions that were made when George Eastman had just invented film, that photography became a booming business, became a technology, became a thing that developed into what it is now and beyond. That's it. Thank you. Questions? Yeah.
When it hit Rhizome and the blogs and all that, it seems like there was confusion about the source of the. It seems like a lot of the facts got distorted. For instance, there wasn't a lawsuit, right?
Well, I was being threatened with a lawsuit.
Which is still pretty different than being.
It's very different.
And also the PepsiCo, like I noticed on that last thing, that person was also the last image you show where they asked the question, what price is this man's freedom, or who owns his freedom?
Yeah, let's go back to
I saw
that.
in their text they also mentioned
Yeah,
being sued by PepsiCo.
yeah,
and
yeah.
that seems to me that it would generate a much different reaction from the net community than the photographer who took this picture is upset that it's been used in a painting, because this, the corporation, the whole e-toy thing, all that has always been about corporations.
Yeah, she was not a big bad corporation. She was an artist.
How pervasive were those confusions?
We discussed. I didn't want. They knew. My original. I didn't reproduce it here because it's kind of long and soppy. But my original post to Rhizome was that a photographer, a photojournalist, had sent me a legal letter, and that I felt that possibly I had been exposed by another photojournalist, and that there was an attitude problem, but that I had no recourse but to do what they wanted me to do, and because she owned copyright, and I mean in the discussions with my lawyer, he said, if it was Pepsi, you would have a case, because it's crazy. And it's crazy to begin with, but the fact that, she has her needs and she has her supporters and she can be made to look sympathetic, and so can you, it's really up for grabs. I mean, her concerns are real. I'm not saying they're not. Copyright is no longer functioning the way it once did. She can't control that image. That image, all of her images, all of their images are up on the web. They have Magnum watermarks, but who cares? I mean, one thing I didn't include was one of these artworks that was made. Actually, it was incredible. It was someone made with some kind of software, a cube, a 3D cube that you could turn with your mouse. But instead of putting my painting on the side of it, they put her photograph on the side of it. And I thought, that doesn't help. That really muddies the waters, because she does own the copyright to that image, and she doesn't own the copyright to my image. That was our dispute. People can do what they want with my image because it's my artwork. That was really our dispute, and she didn't feel it was mine. So, but she has a problem, and photojournalists have a problem, and it's sort of, I think it's crazy to worry when it really doesn't have any direct effect on your earning capacity or your market as a photo-based artist. We all should know that the galleries are different, the collectors are different. It's not the same medium. The ramifications of the work, the concepts, the conceptual basis of the works are absolutely different. So there is no overlap in that sense of competing, which was something that my Minneapolis friend didn't get. So, sorry, did I answer your question? I think I went overboard, yeah?
Hi, that was so interesting, thank you. I have a lot of things to say, but I just, you said at the end that this is the image that you sampled. You didn't see the original one. That wasn't your cropping, I guess is my question.
Yeah, the image that here, let's do this.
Yours is vertical.
The image I found,
And you brought it in, I see.
Yeah, the image I found was already cropped.
Well, I just want to say something about that.
Sorry.
Photographers are in a really weird, paradoxical position that you alluded to, which is that they're recording truth, but there's an aesthetic value to truth that they're mandating and protecting with this great agency. And of course, they're writing up scraps with them because people for photojournalism, so it's not like Pepsi, like you said. But
Yeah.
there's a specific set of aesthetics with horizontal photograph that are not in your painting and not in that crop photograph. A vertical photograph looks like a painting. If you make a vertical photograph, you're referring
To a painting.
If you make a horizontal photograph like that, you're referring to the kind of work that she did at that time. And the aesthetic, the optics are really particular to a kind of camera that permits you to go up to an crazed, rageful man like that and take risk your life. and they'll register depth of field without you focusing. Probably like to do that. So that all that kind of language that makes it expressive is absolutely works. It's really fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Have it transform so profoundly on a physical level.
Well, even
Completely on your side, obviously.
obviously, which you're hired. Yeah.
Physically different it is from the perspective.
I mean, even without all of that's amazing because I don't know that much about cameras per se, or but it's even from a really much more simplistic art historical viewpoint. If you wanted to argue for transformative, portraiture versus landscape, I mean, that's just, it's yeah. Sorry.
This is wonderful. Thank you. I have a couple of questions for you because I can sense that you're very aware of what it is that you're arguing when you're arguing against Susan Mazella's position. That she does have a strong argument, and you do think about the struggle that the Magnum photographers went through to make a living and protect themselves. It was a very valiant organization. They do have a real position to take that we should
Absolutely.
have some respect for.
Yeah.
The thing that really stands out for me in this story is that because you didn't know the source originally, you misdescribed who this guy was. And there are, to me, some serious dangers in that for you as an artist. I mean, obviously that's interesting. That things get
It's
transformed.
essential. It's
It
essential.
may be essential, but it's also treating the truth very cavalierly, which artists are absolutely committed to do.
Can I interrupt? It's about how the truth is treated cavalierly in our culture and in the mass media.
But in that moment, you weren't critiquing that, you were doing it. It seems to me.
I was doing both.
He was Basque, or he was Nicaraguan.
It doesn't matter. Well, the idea is that the image itself doesn't tell you without the context.
Okay, good. So the lack of credit to Susan Meiselas was key to what you were trying to do, in some sense.
Let's say, hypothetically, that I knew her and that I loved that image and that I wanted to go against what I normally do and that she gave me permission, but she wanted a credit, okay? And I made a painting and I stuck her credit on the wall and I made a direct reference to the original. Why would I do that? I mean, it's sort of, this is what she would see, according to what I came to understand from our little spat through her lawyer. She just didn't want to be, she wanted credit.
She didn't want to be erased.
She didn't want to be erased.
From
And
the creation of the image, right?
And I don't want to erase her. I kind of regret having used that image. But in truth, I mean, every image I use from the mass media has an author. And I have to say first that as I started this project with mass media, I became increasingly aware of the complexity of the thing, and that I was more aware of it by the end of the project than I was in the beginning, and that's sort of my work method. My sources teach me about themselves. So it's possible, how can I put this? It's possible that that all the pieces of critique are not pre-assembled as you approach a project, that in the process you learn things, and it's a flawed activity, it's a flawed process, and what you say is valid. It's not. I think it's important to actually to demonstrate the amoral quality of images by extending that amorality. That's what I do, and maybe that's perverse, but
It's risky in terms of
it's not so risky when. Well, why is it risky?
it's risky. Well, the biographer of Reagan, he made stuff up in that biography, for example, and didn't footnote to say what stuff was true and what stuff was fiction, and sold the book as a
I'm-
responsible about the fact. I mean, when
I'm
you
selling-
use the expression of fact.
I'm selling the idea as painting is fiction. See, that's the thing. No one looks at a painting and says, this happened. People look at photographs and they automatically say, this is evidence, this is proof. The photograph is proof. The photograph is a trace, all that stuff. They don't look at a painting and say that. The idea, the concept is that painting is a medium that is not evidence. So it has this baggage. So when you take images that are supposed to be representations of facts, and you take them into a medium, this is the nugget of it, that is supposed to represent fantasy, fiction, lyrical, navel-gazing, you name it, but anything but fact, what you're doing is you're saying the photograph may not be fact. That when Kappa took the photograph of the soldier falling in the Spanish Civil War, it may not be what we thought it was. When those two people were kissing in Times Square in that famous photograph, people were so upset to find out that was staged. What I'm saying is that every image is mediated and framed, every photograph, every mass media image. We know that the paintings are. That's what painting is. So when you take images that you assume aren't, and you remake them as paintings, I mean, this is my project, long term. Doesn't have to be mass media sources. It could be other things. But in the long term, that's my project. That's what I want it to do. Sorry.
There should be some.
Can we go to dinner and talk about this? Anybody else? Yeah.
It seems like when you're talking about the dichotomy, using the dichotomy between idea and expression,
Mm-hmm.
that your situation was unique because you both had different ideas, perhaps, that ended up with the same expression versus.
Well, I don't know. See, expression, it's defined in in a specific way. The expressive portion of a work is that which is that comes from the author. So it's an expression of their personal artistic skill or thought or whatever. So it can be. I mean, my expression is done in paint. It's made with certain kinds of skills, very separate from her kinds of skills. It's about those skills and about how you use them to make your art. That's what they take it to mean. And whereas the fact is the thing, the subject, the object that you're appropriating. So.
I want to amplify one thing about expression, which is that it also seeks to be connected with the unique individuality of the author.
Mm-hmm.
What makes that person
Their
unique, and
style, their
that seems to get
voice.
at somehow almost an ideological difference in terms of the notion of what authorship is between your position and Susan Meiselas' position. Very radically different notion of what the author is. And therefore why you want to protect your work or set it free.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not just economic,
Yeah.
it's really kind of philosophical.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it when people did my thing. Of course, it was for that reason. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think that definitely a major problem is the prohibitive cost of the lawsuit. If a large, I don't know how much money Magnum has, but if they can step up and say, we can just overwhelm an artist with, the cost of lawsuits, so sort of, bankrupt people just with the threat of lawsuits. That's definitely a horrible thing. However, piggybacking off of two questions, we live in a highly visual culture, and I do think that there are some things wrong when a small child seeing an image of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech automatically thinks cell phones. That's the first thing that comes to their mind because of the way in which that image has been appropriated by a corporation that just wants to move its product. And yet, it seems wrong that since images so much control our lives, that an individual or a corporation should have almost a tyrannical power over how that image is used. As you were pointing out, you want to take an image and transform its meaning into something else. A problem that I see, though, is that you have the Susan Sontag quote, which says that once an image enters sort of this public marketplace, the author's personal intention is lost. What you're left with is the image itself. So, when a You know, it's that Sontag quote that sort of shows the weakness within that argument.
Well, I'm not making, okay. When you, Susan Meiselas and I had the same idea, basically, which is true, which is if you can, if you package, if what you're making is defined as art, it is perceived in a certain way. And when she produced that book, it was a work of art. It was an art book, okay? It was not sent out into the media, and her lawyer pointed that out to me. And when you make a painting, Susan Sontag's argument is so specifically about the medium of photography, and it's so much deeper than I can go or care to go, because my background in the theory of photography is not that extensive. But when you're talking about that kind of an authorship, it's specific, the authorship of the photograph, the photojournalist's photograph as it exists in the world. And when you talk about a painting or, I mean, any of these things, the authorship is on the surface. It's obvious. The photograph is supposed to be transparent. The author of a photojournalistic photograph is not supposed to be present in the photograph. It's part of this huge pile of theory that, and so there's a hypocrisy there, or there's just that's the wrong word. There's a conflict, because the author is there, and it is their work, but they're absenting themselves for reasons. Their mission is to report, to be neutral. They're not neutral. So what you have to see right away is that painting it's not neutral. It's not telling you it's neutral. It doesn't want to be neutral in the sense that it is expression. It is the product of the hand and somebody's ideas and some skill thrown in. Whereas the photojournalistic photograph is very complex. It's all those things, and yet it is, to some degree, evidence. And it's the way the evidence is contextualized that photojournalists are trying to protect. And yet, what Susan Sontag is saying, and what I think is true, and since digital technology has changed everything, they can't. And that's why what she was saying is dangerous. But what I'm saying is, instead of saying, oh God, it's dangerous and we have to protect everything and keep it from changing, we can't. We can't. It's the wrong way to think about it. There have to be more creative ways to think about it. And that's another lecture. It's like, are there any more? Yeah.
How long are you using this technique?
Of sampling images from the world around me, or from, well, I think it probably began in the 90s when I was looking at science photography, and I was looking at textbooks, because I was...
That was the first case of problem that you had.
Oh yeah. And I'm not well known. So the thing is, once you become super famous like Jeff Koons and you make a lot of money, people are going to sue you. And so I was really kind of halfway gratified that I was being sued. I felt...
That was my question.
Yeah.
Which is, how does that situation impact your work?
Oh, you mean, have I changed the way I do things since that?
Yes, it's how this
Do I feel...
chemistry of the fear.
Oh, I don't have a
Not
fear.
but the danger.
Yeah, I'm more aware of it, and I'm thankful for that, because I should have been aware of it. But coming as I did through kind of public domain, declassified photography, it just didn't occur to me. And it never occurred to me that that a painting wasn't a large shift, a huge change from my source material. In other words, I didn't know the term transformative use, and I didn't know the problem between derivative and transformative, but I already had, I felt that what I did was transformative. It just seemed obvious. And I mean, often what seems obvious has nothing to do with the law. So I think I haven't changed the way I'm doing things, but it's very good to be aware of other people's sensitive issues, and so I'm more sensitive.
In an effort to be sensitive to everyone's time issues, I would suggest that you take the questions to the front of the room, and we thank Joy for her really good question.